All right, next up is Jessamine West. Hello,
Hi,
how are you?
doing pretty good. How's everybody?
I'm good. We're good. I think we're all good. I really enjoyed our conversation last week, so I look forward to your presentation. And here you go.
Super. Hi, my name's Jessica West. I live in Vermont. I'm a librarian and also a technology instructor, and I prepared some slides just so I can show them to you, and then I'll come back afterwards for questions. Does that look okay? So turn off video feed, and then do this. That. Good, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk real quick about something I usually talk a lot about, which is myths about the digital divide, things we think are true that maybe aren't as true as we think. None of this is real earth-shattering, but it's just talking about what we know about the digital divide from working in public libraries. There's links to more stuff. I link to a lot of Pew reports and a lot of other information at librarian.net/digital divide if people want to follow links. But a little bit of information to get started. I wrote a book called Without a Net, Librarians Bridging the Digital Divide, which talks about sort of schemes that libraries can use to address this problem. Did a lot of research, pretty interested in it. I work with a lot of tiny rural libraries in rural Vermont, as well as in a small town in Vermont, teaching computers. So some of this stuff is stuff that we sort of already talked about. 34% of Americans with no broadband at home. As we know, that's completely not evenly distributed. People are rural, people have disabilities, people who are seniors, low income, low education, minorities, etc. The thing that's even more surprising is the 21% of Americans that have no internet at home at all. And what Catherine was saying totally rang true. Many of these people have no point of reference to even get started with the internet, much less be able to do things like apply for a job at Home Depot, get on Facebook, etc. And the thing that is the most surprising is that 1 in 10 of these people who aren't online are even interested in being online. So we get into this awkward situation where people aren't interested in it, they may not even know what it has to offer them, and then a lot of times they get stuck in a situation where suddenly they have to learn it, and they're stuck, and they wind up at the public library or somewhere else. One of the things we know about the internet from the media, and this was from Pew's Project for Excellence in Journalism, their statistics are wonderful. There's competing media messages. If all you know about the internet is what you see on television, you think, number one, the internet makes you more productive, right? There's all these happy people with laptops smiling as their work just gets done without them. Great. But then there's also the other competing message. You get online, and the first thing that happens is somebody steals your identity, steals your children, breaks into your bank account, etc. If all you know about the internet is what you see on TV, this is the thing you think is true. It's not secure. Your kids are meeting creeps on the internet, etc., etc. And for a lot of people, the confusing part is they get the magic aspect of it, that the computer does magic, and what they don't understand is why the computer does some magic and not others, and it's very difficult to sort of explain this stuff to people. So a lot of people say, why libraries? And I think Catherine gave kind of a setup for this. Libraries are the place that people go to sort of overcome this hurdle. And the main reason is we have these four things. We are public. We have computers and we have broadband access. And most importantly, we have staff, people who are here to actually help you. American Library Association study found that 97% of the population of the United States is served by a public library. Now, that's kind of weird that there's 3% that aren't, but that's pretty good numbers just in terms of being set up to help solve a problem. So the divides we have are economic. People don't have money to buy a computer. They wouldn't know how to get a computer broadband, or they couldn't afford it. Usability divide. When we look at the US population, we find that 40% of the population has low literacy skills, and the internet is all about reading. You also have lots of seniors, people with cognitive and motor disabilities. And you've got participation inequality. One of the things we know about social networks, even though I use them all the time, is that you've got kind of this 90-10 rule. 90% of users don't contribute at all, 9% contribute a little, 1% of the people who use them account for most of the interaction. And it's sort of like when you learned that Wikipedia, which is really terrific and I love it, is really mostly being maintained by about 1,500 core users. So it looks like a different kind of democracy than what we think. So we act like Facebook is everybody, and Facebook really isn't everybody. And then the thing that I'm speaking to is the empowerment divide, people who feel that they don't know enough to get started, or they don't feel like they know what they need to know. And this is just a quick image, if you can see it. It's basically a how to use the telephone graphic from a 1946 Manhattan phone book. It used to be when you learned new technology, you could follow a list and read down a list, and you can't do that anymore, and it's one of the reasons it's very challenging. You can't just 1, 2, 3, now you're on the internet, go. So, big question, who cares? Well, for one, the government. And every time you do your taxes online, the government saves $2.50, and it makes more errors. The government would like to use economies of scale to serve more Americans with more things more cheaply. So in addition to just your family that wants you on Facebook and everything else, you've got kind of a society which can save money when you get online. So it's a different kind of situation, and this administration, much more than the past, is really interested in reaching these people who are digitally divided. So the reason it actually matters is stuff like this. I'm going to show a couple screenshots and just tell you what they are. The big deal with the empowerment divide is if you can't understand the internet, you are in danger of, the thing that everybody's afraid of. You get email from Bank of America that says, we're a little worried about your bank account, and you click through this link and you wind up at this website that wants your bank login information. You and I know this isn't Bank of America. Novice users, digitally divided people, they have no idea. Similarly, Google. I use Google all the time. Every time I log in, Google asks for my phone number. Maybe I don't feel like giving Google my phone number, but if I don't understand how to use this interface, and I don't know enough that I can click this little thing in the corner, I wind up doing the thing that the web designer wants me to do, which is maybe not the same thing that I want. And Google is really pressures you about this. Are you sure? And I understand these messages. Novice users don't. Similarly, Discover Card wants me to transfer balances, blah, blah, blah. If I'm the novice user, am I going to click the big orange button or the tiny words that say no thanks? Similarly, the post office, my favorite people. I use them all the time. I want to send a package to Michigan. The options they give me are $26 and $24. I have to know a little bit more about the internet to know that I can click to figure out that it's cheaper to send something through first-class mail. All of these things are really important for people. So, misconceptions, just going to go through these real quick. First one, older generation. They're just going to drop dead and then we'll be fine, right? No, not right. This is a chart from looking at New York City households, difference between low income and high income. The digital divide are those 20% of people that even in 2012, low income people don't have it, high income people do. That's not older people. Often what it is new immigrants, people without English speaking ability. And what happens is you get these immigrant communities, people then learn skills in English and move out of those communities, and they're replaced by people from other countries who are younger with that same low level of technology literacy. So where I am, rural Vermont, maybe the older generation will die off. Urban areas, totally not happening. Plus, it's just an unkind thing to say, let's be honest. Kids today, they all use computers, right? We all know this. Well, this is a chart, kind of hard to read, looking at who owns cell phones and what they're doing with them. The little purple chunks are kids who own cell phones, 75%, kids who text, and then kids who text a lot. What's really important about this is these 25% of kids who don't own cell phones, they're not talking to the other 75% of kids sending 200 texts back and forth all the time. This is like the digital divide in a nutshell. Don't have a cell phone, not even communicating to the heavily communicating people who talk all the time. Well, aren't these statistics out of date? Doesn't this change really quickly? Well, we used to get big changes in broadband adoption. This is Pew again. In 2004, 2005, 2006, the percentage change, who was getting more broadband, those numbers were big. Now in 2009, 2010, and even in 2011, we're seeing fewer and fewer of the remaining people getting online, fewer and fewer people taking that leap. The people who don't have it aren't getting it, and we're trying to figure out how to sort of bring them across. And the cell phone, smartphone thing, people will just learn it, right? You've got the people in Africa who get cell phones and then they're buying and selling grain on their phones, right? All we got to do is give everybody phones. Really, we're still not even in this section. This is Arbitron ratings. We're still not in the place where even in the highest adoption level areas, we have people who are owning smartphones in large percentages. Mobile's ubiquitous, smartphones are less ubiquitous. And the thing that people don't talk about with smartphones are bandwidth caps, lack of net neutrality, and these plans are very expensive, which means people with little or less money, they're left behind sort of even more than usual. Last, people don't want to learn technology. Why is it our problem? And Catherine mentioned this, but I'm just going to show another chart from Pew. A lot of the people who are adult non-users feel that they would need someone at this point to help them get online. And more often than not, that turns into the public library. So the good news is, once you can get on these networks or whatever, this was Facebook. During the floods we had in Vermont, anybody who was already using Facebook, it became the sole place that people could figure out, are the roads open? Are the roads closed? What's going on? How's this going to work? In my dream world, what we do in the library is we start setting up these processes. I don't care if you love Facebook. I just want you to know it exists and know how to get to it if your power's out and your cell phone is the only way you can communicate with the outside world. Access to information, basically, in whatever format, as far as I'm concerned, is a right, not a privilege of a few. And it's especially not the privilege of a few who understand it and know how to get it. The more we enlarge the community of people who understand, the more people who get it, the more we live up, I think, to our own ideals. This is our little library blog. We've got a strategic plan. Everybody knows the public librarian in town, and they also know she doesn't have internet at home, and she's not a very tech-savvy user. But she decided when we did strategic planning to set up a blog on Blogger so that she could put the results of all of the sessions up there so that more people in town who couldn't come to the meetings could see it. And my favorite part of the whole thing is here down at the bottom, where Amy says, if I can do this with technology, so can you. So last, this is just an Occupy Wall Street screenshot that I really like. A lot of people have seen this photo. What a lot of people don't know is that this lady is a school librarian from New York. And so if I can sort of, wax metaphorical for a moment, now's really the time when librarians are marching. And people who know librarians know that we do this stuff all the time. For better and improved access to content and scholarship, and most of all for themselves. So addressing the digital divide and electronic equality is becoming the largest part of what we're doing, which, yeah, it's messed up for now, but it's also sort of getting better, I think. So thanks very much for my quick rundown of digital divide mythology.
Thank you very much, Jessamine. That was a great presentation. We are taking questions via Twitter. We are at the William Allen White School of Journalism at KU, and the room is full of journalists. I'm an aspiring professional journalist. What kind of questions do journalists need to be asking about the digital divide?
Well, I think it's not even that they need to be asking questions, but I think that they really need to be coherent in how they talk about technology in addition to technological inequality. The thing that I think of the most when I think about journalists is the fact that many journalists may not understand technology as well as they'd like to, and yet they're writing the stories that are the ones that are telling the people that they get on the internet and their identity is going to be stolen. So I feel like there needs to be some responsibility to the messages that are being sent about technology at the same time as people are writing about technology. And, as everybody knows, it's kind of unsexy and uninteresting to write about the poor people and people who are having a hard time, that there's the social justice aspect to a lot of this that I think people feel like is a niche. And I think really talking more about these topics all the time because they're important is an important part of helping the people who maybe aren't over that hurdle and could use some help to sort of get there, and chatting up the library and every other place that people can go to get access to this technology. the more we can spread the message together, I think the better everybody will be.
We have a question on Twitter from Becca Harsh. She tweets, if 90% of non-internet users aren't interested in access, who and where are the non-internet users who want access?
I think the non-internet users who want access are either people, I mean, in rural America, this is easy. It's the people who live up the mountain and the DSL technology hasn't come to their house yet. And they're just like TikTok waiting. But satellite is still too expensive and for a lot of sort of middle-class people. And DSL and cable are, geographically limited. So if you live in some place with hills and rivers, you have to kind of wait for the free market to decide it's worth providing services to you. And I think also some of that are people who shift, right? Like if you're a kid who lived at home and you moved into your own place and suddenly you're like, hey, I should really do this. Or seniors who suddenly have either an option or a person to help them, or disabled people who suddenly get the adaptive technology that will help them actually interact with their technology instead of it being this sort of constant, terrible hurdle for them. Or, people who didn't have a job and now they have a job. We see a lot of free geek type situations that do, come here and learn to build your own computer and then we'll send you home with a computer. So for a lot of people, purchasing the computer is the big hurdle. They might be able to afford the broadband if they got to the point where they had a computer. So, Catherine has spoken to some of this as well, but I think for a lot of people, they have little hurdles, and then the other 90% have either much larger hurdles or kind of what I call social hurdles, where their own concerns, anxieties, or misapprehensions about what technology can get them and their lack of knowing anyone else who can give them better information keep them from even taking the first step. Like, I think it's like driving. Like, you can make a choice to not drive a car. That's a different choice than deciding you don't even want to learn how to drive as opposed to getting a driver's license. You never learn how to drive, you're setting yourself up for some trouble. You don't want to drive a car, that's your business. That's between you and your community. And I think with technology, it's the same thing. You get on Facebook, it doesn't solve a problem for you. Terrific, but you don't know what Facebook is, and then your town floods and you have no other way to interact with your people. That's a shame. And I think as a society we should at least make people aware of what their options are, and then they're adult people and they can decide to do what they want to do.
Last month, the FCC and some of the big conglomerates made a push to make internet. Made a commitment to lessen the price of internet $9.99 for families who qualify for school lunches and various other qualifications. What are your thoughts on this? Do you foresee this as something that will actually make a dent in the divide?
Well, I think it's complicated, right? I think there's some people for whom a coupon to buy a cheap computer, a cheap Windows computer, and a cheap internet will help them. And there's classes, but the classes are online, and I'm not entirely sure saying, hey, we've got classes online is really going to solve a problem for people who have no interaction with the online world, generally speaking. I feel like sometimes the digital divide and that kind of training doesn't scale. But the thing that really bothers me, I guess, and I hate to be kind of about the whole thing, but usually those Comcast deals are only available to people who don't owe Comcast any money, and who often, and this is just the plans that I've seen, have children in school. So, okay, that's good for the people who have children in school, but what it means is you've got to be someone who's never gotten in trouble with the cable company before, which one of the things we know about sort of the economic divide is a lot of times there's that kind of up, down with your income. I'm afraid that the hardest to serve, who are going to be maybe people who had and then lost cable, or maybe who have a debt to Comcast, or people who don't have kids in school who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and up, are still not going to be served by this at the same time as Comcast writes, 8 million press releases about how awesome they are and how solving the problem they are. So I feel like every little bit helps on the one hand, but I feel like this is kind of a PR move that the FCC basically, let's be honest, forced Comcast into, because Comcast wants to deliver services and they're not going to be able to deliver some of those services until they have a higher percentage of users. And I really feel like the hardest to serve remain the hardest to serve, and that this is actually not addressing those people the way I wish that it would.
Blowing in. One is from our professor, Simran. She tweets, how do we break through cultural barriers to technological engagement? This engagement is necessary for a functioning democracy.
Well, I think you buried the lead where it's like, okay, given that this is necessary for a functional democracy, which I agree with you, and I think that's a really salient point, what are the infrastructure pieces that we need in order to sort of address this? And I think the cultural shift, and this does speak to sort of the journalism angle, is having an approach. I mean, it's really almost an each one teach one kind of thing, that for a lot of people who aren't online, the issue is much more social than it is anything else. I believe anybody can learn to use a computer, but they have to have the right teacher. And so I think what we need to do is really try and foster a culture of, empowerment is such an overused word, but I really feel like there needs to be a sort of, you can do this, we encourage you to do this, we're going to be supportive for you to do this, and it's useful and maybe necessary for you to do this. I feel like you go into a public library nowadays and you've got maybe a 50-50 or 40-60 chance that the person who's staffing the rural public library is going to further the computers are hard message, not be like, no, don't worry about it. We're totally going to get you on email. They'll sit down in front of a computer and be like, I know, who can figure these things out, which is a really problematic thing to get across to people who are already, it confirms people's worst suspicions. And so I feel like paying attention to your own messages as an educator, paying attention to your own messages as a journalist, paying attention to your own messages as a librarian, and making sure those messages, in addition to what you actually say, but the meta message of how you act and how your policies work and what your expectations are supportive, encouraging, and as much as we can, empowering. We have to find more genuine options that will encourage people to get online and have a positive user experience before we can just assume people are going to get online and do their taxes. Taxes are hard enough. Interacting with a terrible website to do taxes is insult to injury. We need to start addressing the usability factor in order to get to the empowerment factor.
Okay. Got another question on Twitter from TSN251. How do you teach others to be safe on the internet so people don't fall into traps? And also, we talked a little bit about this as well. What are, to piggyback on that, what are some of the mysteries that surround the internet to people who don't know?
Well, I think safety covers a couple things. Like safety, you've got to deal with children making smart decisions. And part of that is paying a lot of attention to what your kids do and having an open dialogue with your kids. But it's also you understanding things so that you can discuss them with your child and not take your child's word for whatever's going on. Safety is banking and other personal information. And I encourage people to take tiny steps with large companies so that they can have, if you buy something from Amazon, it's a fairly, I'm not even sure what the word is. It's a fairly predictable experience and it's fairly safe. I'll buy stuff from anybody on the internet who lets me send them their credit card, but I'm like a nut like that. I don't encourage other people to do that. But as far as, I encourage people to take small steps that are secure so that they can have successes and build on those, and also talk to other people. When I tell people, oh, you buy toner at Staples? It's so much cheaper to buy toner on the internet. Let me show you. Or printer ink. Like, printer ink is like this giant scam, but you can get it on the internet for cheap. For some people, that solves a problem. Or people who send out, the library that sends out 1,000 newsletters, they say 44 cents every time somebody will take one over email. But if you want to talk about the mysteries, web addresses. No one knows what a URL is in the novice computer world. And so as a result, like with my Bank of America example, they don't know that they're not at Bank of America because companies don't want you to get all bogged down in web addresses. They just want to guide you through their own website. So, using products like Gmail, which has kind of phishing alerts, as an example, or using Firefox with ad blocker installed so that you don't see all the blinky, get your mortgage, lose 30 pounds by Christmas, whatever the thing is. there's safety, and then there's also having a user experience that makes you, I mean, I really hate to say this because it sounds totally snooty, but using a Mac instead of Windows only because, not because they're not both completely decent platforms, but because for the novice user, the Mac sends up many fewer oogie boogie messages that your system might be at risk. Windows does this because it wants to inform you. That's fine. The Mac doesn't give you the same level of alarm about those things, which I think flips people out and then keeps them from being able to interact usefully with their technology. So teaching people about URLs, helping people choose a decent platform that they're comfortable with, choosing the right tools within your browser so that you can minimize the hassle factor and maximize kind of the fun factor of the internet. Like, I know there's a lot of people who are new to technology who really don't find it fun, and then you sit down at their computer and you see what they have to deal with, and you can totally understand that, but a lot of times it's hard at that point to undo it for people compared to getting them set up for the first, I'm sort of platform and browser agnostic, but I think some of them are better for certain kinds of users, and it's worthwhile keeping that in mind and not having me all, oh, I like you all in different ways, and choosing your audience, I guess. Long answer to a short question.
All right, we have a question from Stephen Gray, KU. How does living and working in a rural area of Vermont without as much home internet access impact your views on the digital divide?
Well, I basically get to teach someone how to use a mouse, get on Facebook, or get their first email account literally every week. And I go to, urban areas and people are like, email's for old people. No one's using email anymore. It's the kids with the beep, beep, beep and Facebook. And that's not true. I think it's one of the reasons I really phrase this in kind of a myth way, is I really feel like people have understandings about technology based on what's around them. And, I live in areas where my friends don't have cell phones. No big deal, right? But it means that, like, Twitter isn't even real to them. And Facebook is kind of real to them. And, location-based games, Foursquare, I am the mayor of every single thing in my town, which is, like, hilarious for me. But it means that those things haven't even come to where I am and they're on the way, sort of. I think the other thing I've really learned is really the technology should be totally your choice. Like, I live among people who have completely wonderful, fulfilling, terrific lives without Facebook. And when they come to me and say, do I need this? I'm like, realistically, 800 million people use it, but you don't have to be one of them unless you want to. Here's what it does. Here's what it doesn't do. Maybe you get an account and then you just don't look at it. So when your house floods, you're all set. But I feel like the people in rural areas, one of the things about them, especially librarians, is they don't travel. So you don't hear from the people in these tiny towns about what their lives are like and what their jobs are like. You hear from the people in the big towns and the big cities, and the New York Times is always writing about New York. And they just have a completely different reality here. And so that's why I think the storytelling, kind of the theme of this conference, is so important, because telling the stories of the people who aren't getting their stories told is a really huge part of raising awareness, which helps get the ears of the right people to help them solve the problems.
Right, a world without Facebook and Twitter, I can't imagine.
Come visit.
I might have to. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. It was outstanding. Have a great day.